Okay, so this video is probably going to come on the back of sociology, science, and some issues around that. I want to talk a little about connecting to the past. I'm someone who's always had a big interest in history, and I'm quite sentimental insofar as when there is a poignant anniversary of something, particularly if it's a tragic event. And that's not to state that I'm being pessimistic, but there's something particular about tragic events that have a certain resonance. I think it might be a cultural thing as well because in the UK we do tend to be quite, I think, quite interested in our past more so than some other countries. Um, to cite a recent example, there was the centenary of the Battle of the Somme. Now, the Battle of the Somme was one of the major offensives of the First World War, one of the deadliest battles in human history, in total over 1 million casualties. That includes wounded and missing. Um, Over 300,000 killed, over 1 million casualties in total. Totally devastating battle. On the first day alone, 19,240 British service personnel were killed in one day, and the average daily casualty rate was 3,000. So this was a really, really huge battle, and it had a devastating impact on this country. I'm not going to talk at length about that though, because I've already made a video about the Somme centenary, but I'm just citing that as an example. Um, there are others as well. What I find is I'm fascinated by history, and I frequently watch DVDs that are, I guess you could classify them as period films, although sometimes I think period film doesn't really do it justice because that would send out the impression of sort of like, oh, costume drama. It's more than that. I think it's, for me, I do feel quite moved, especially watching British history because it's my country. It's something I can relate to. I mean, I'm interested in other history as well. I'm interested in American history, in history from other parts of Europe, and in the Far East. Those would be the three sort of regions that I'm particularly interested in. But South American, African history as well. Generally, history. I'm just interested in. Um, in the UK, we have something called the National Trust, which is sort of a charity foundation. It's pretty well established. I think it was established about 100 years ago, and it's basically set up to preserve our heritage. I think it's a very worthwhile foundation or organization, perhaps is a better term. But what I really want to touch on in this video is where we are at the present. Okay, so we know it is July 2016, but this is a little hard to explain. The point we are now, is it further ahead than we thought that we would be? Arguably, it's not. I mean, the Great Recession, I would argue, slowed everything down, at least in the Western world. The sort of 2008 to 2011, broadly speaking, Great Recession. I remember that time, around that time when I first really got involved in social media, for me, it was really quite something. Um, and I thought, this is amazing. I can share comments that are read by people on the other side of the world. And now here I am uploading YouTube videos, and perhaps it's because I don't have a huge number of views on my channel, but the novelty has on some level worn off. And I don't want that to be misunderstood. I'm still enormously grateful for the opportunities this provides. But I guess it's because so many other people are doing it, it sort of wears the novelty off. So in the coming weeks, I am going to try and develop my channel a bit more, evaluate some of my videos, and improve them a little bit. I know there's been a problem with the sound quality. Incidentally, I'm going to upload a load of videos soon explaining that situation, but I just mean improve them in terms of maybe some of the graphics and so on. I'm not quite sure. I need to look at this. But if you look at futuristic films, dystopian films, or utopian films that were made in the, let's say, between the 1950s and 1980s, um, one famous example, of course, is Back to the Future. And in that last year, I know there was some commemorative events to sort of mark, because one of the films, I think it was the second one, was set in the year 2015, which of course was last year. Now, some of the things that the film speculated on didn't quite come to fruition, but we are starting to get some of the technology is starting to advance to not that level, but not that far off. There's that new device now where I'm not sure what the proper name is, but it's like a little not a board, but it's basically two wheels and you stand on it and it's controlled by body balance or something. They're starting to be sold commercially now. Forget what the name is. I see a lot of kids these days, and they look like they're gliding around, and they actually have little wheels inside the shoes, but they're built into the shoes, so it almost looks invisible. It looks like the kids are. I mean, these are designed for children. Looks like they're literally gliding along. So there's certain things that are around now that definitely weren't around 10 years ago. But if I had to say some inventions of the 2010s, I find it a little bit harder to say things that stand out compared to the 2000s, i.e., pre Great Recession. So I wonder, is it a financial issue that there has been less funding for some of these projects? It could well be, of course, that a lot of it's shifted to the east, and the Chinese are leading the way in a lot of these things. Robot technology. They're really investing a lot into that. And the thing is, nationalism shouldn't play too much a role in this. We should welcome human development wherever it is. Hopefully, one day some of these things will be commercially available. I still think it would be nice to one day have a situation where nobody in the world had to do an unpleasant job and it was all done by robots. Of course, then it gets into complicated questions about, labor forces, labor costs, unemployment, all sorts of things come into that. And I'll save that for another video. But, we're looking at the future and we're looking at all these sort of developments. And to what extent we have developed is a matter of debate. I personally think that this particular time doesn't feel that forward as we would have expected it to be. Um, I mean, there are some things, maybe if you look around, maybe fashion, car designs, um, television formats, and so on. I mean, the format of entertainment programs or whatever. There are some changes, but I don't think they're particularly radical, at least not in this country. I mean, for example, it's only in the last 5 years we've even had televised debates in general elections. That's something that many other countries have led on years before. And I'm not saying that the UK is not a developed country. Of course we are. We're a strong, developed country, but there are some areas that I do think we are somewhat behind in. And I think the UK is actually an interesting model for this discussion because the UK is a country with a very long history. I mean, our written history goes back to the Romans 2,000 years ago, but our established history, I mean, significant human urbanization in this country goes back at least 5,000 years. There has been sophisticated cultures pre the Romans in this country. And some of the world's oldest humanoid footprints have actually been found in the British Isles, and that is outside Africa. 800,000-year-old footprints were found on a beach in Norfolk. So this country has a very, very long history, not as a political country, but as a land. Um, so we have that long history, and we're a country that is often associated with traditions. A lot of tourists come to see the quirky British traditions, and I quite like that in a sense because it is a unique thing. It's part of our identity. Um, and I don't want a situation where we shuttle so far into the future and so fast that things become unrecognizable. I guess one of the reasons why there might sometimes be a backlash against progressive politics, and I want to be careful the way I say this because I don't want to be misunderstood, but I think sometimes the reason there is resentment or criticism of progressive politics is the main argument about progressive politics is, oh well, this is the way the world is moving. This is the way things are going. And it's sort of this uncompromising, that's the way it is, and you have to accept it kind of attitude. Now, the opposite of that, which of course is conservative traditionalist thinking, although it has been pointed out, the former Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg pointed out that it's ironic that it is the Conservative Party that has caused this radical event in Britain in recent months. Anyway, yeah, I think that's why there's a backlash against progressive politics because it looks kind of arrogant, like this is the way that we move forward, and you can't really debate it. That's it. And anyone who is seen to be clinging to the past is seen as small-minded, is seen to be this, that, and the other. What I would argue is why not have both? Why not say, yes, it's good to have a tolerant society. Yes, it's good to look at human progress, life expectancy, all these things that we associate with human progress. Human rights, I would add to that. It's something I think is very downplayed. And I would also argue, and without being too controversial with this, sometimes what one flaw that Asian countries have, in my opinion, is they're very, very good with technology, with in some parts of Asia, life expectancy and those sort of issues. Not so hot on human rights. And I think human progress works both ways. What's the point of having a utopian society where all the streets are really clean and there's gleaming skyscrapers and there's people on hovercrafts if you cannot speak your mind? So I think human rights does come into it as well. Um, but get back to the original sort of target of my video. I think sometimes people fear that the future is coming too fast, and yet sometimes when I look at period dramas, for instance, it's not a case of the good old days. I think every generation has its different challenges, and there were certain challenges people, let's say 100, 150 years ago, had that we didn't have today. I mean, child mortality was very high in the Victorian period. Diseases were rife, even worse in the periods before that. But I'm going to use the Victorian period as an example because it's closer, so we can kind of relate to it a little bit more than we could with, say, I don't know, the Tudors, to use the British context. Child mortality was high. In parts of inner London, life expectancy was 27. Life was tough. Um, Work was extremely um, tumultuous. It was very, very, for want of a better term, physically demanding. People worked very long hours. They got very, very little leisure time. Life was hard. On the other hand, there are certain things, problems we have in the world today that they didn't necessarily have then. They didn't have to deal with cyberbullying. They didn't have paparazzi that went around harassing celebrities. Cancer was a lot less in those days because there was a lot less preservatives and artificial colouring and so on in food, which is sometimes argued to be one of the main reasons why cancer rates are high in developed countries. So I think every generation has its unique challenges. Um, I think mental health, we're a lot more sympathetic today, and that's definitely one area that has progressed. That doesn't mean it's ideal. There's still a lot of people who feel alienated, and suicide still happens. Um, but in the old days, say for example, there'd been a train crash, a major train crash. There would have been maybe a priest or two to comfort people. There would have been neighbours that would have helped out. But other than that, there wasn't really. I'm talking like the 1950s. I'm not talking the Dark Ages. I'm talking within living memory. There wasn't really what we would regard today as, professional counselling or anything like that. It would just be a case of, oh, let's pull together. And if, let's say, someone died, or a child died from a disease, neighbours would be sympathetic, but that other than that, that would be it. It would be get on with life. This is the way life is. So there was a toughness to life in those days that I think we sometimes overlook. But like I say, there's challenges today that people didn't necessarily have then. It could be argued community spirit was better in older days. Could be argued that actually one side effect of technology is destroying social life. I mean, you could go to a party, you look around, and a lot of people will be clicking away on their phones rather than actually talking to their friends. So I think that is one negative side effect of the digital revolution. Um, so there's a lot of different angles to look at this, and I think it's a case of, I mean, for me, my bedroom, just to give an example, is kind of a little microcosm. My bedroom's like a museum of, I really need to tidy this place up actually, but I have, for example, I collect old mugs. I'll just give you an example of what I'm talking about. Bear with me a second. Now, if you look at this, that's a mug from the coronation of, actually, the Silver Jubilee of King George V, 1935, and I'm being careful as I handle this. 1935. So this mug is 81 years old. They're actually pretty common in charity shops in the UK. You could get these for a few pounds, and I do have a bit of a collection. Now, why do I do this? It's not because I'm a hardcore royalist. I'm not actually. Um, it's because I'm holding history in my hand. So let's say, for example, the British monarchy does collapse in the near future, which isn't inconceivable. This is history. Same reason why I collect old coins. And when I look at period dramas, I think this can be seen in every aspect. That's why I'm not a massive fan of this sort of notion that technology always improves entertainment. It can definitely help, but I don't get overly enthusiastic about like, oh, this film's in 3D or enhanced quality or whatever. I'm not a luddite. I definitely appreciate technology can have its usefulness, but sometimes you just want to see a good old fashioned production there's no special effects. It's just people doing good old fashioned acting. They're reading the lines, they're playing the character roles, and that's it. Some people might say it's boring, but I do sometimes wonder if there's this kind of eternal conflict between holding on to the past and beckoning for the future. Now, I'm no Luddite. Part of me is very excited about the future. I do think, well, what's the world going to be like in 2066? And I'm actually, despite the negative overtone of a lot of my videos, I am actually quite optimistic. I believe that there could potentially be some exciting things in the future. But I think human problems are going to hold us back in many regards. I think religion has a lot to answer for. I'm not an atheist, but I do think that religion has a lot to answer for in terms of holding back human progress. I mean, how can there be any hope for a country like, with all due respect, Pakistan, when you have religious fanatics blowing people up because they insult their holy book? I mean, how can human progress go forward when you have that sort of mentality? And I'm not picking on Pakistan, by the way. I'm just using it as one example because there are plenty of people in Pakistan who would agree with me and who know that this holds their country back. And that's tragic because I think there's a lot of potential. I think every country has potential, just that there are issues involved, like the one I've just mentioned. Um, but I am quite excited to think though, okay, this is 2016. What's the world going to be like in 2056, 2066, 2076? Is it going to be much better, or is it going to be unrecognizably bad? I do think that environmental issues are hugely important, and you don't have to be a tree hugger to see that. It's common sense. Although in some parts of the world, I do think we're reversing the trend. Now in the UK, for example, the number of plastic bags is being reduced, and this isn't like I don't think these are sort of tree hugging issues. I think they're very, very important issues that a lot of people need to relate to. They're very important. Because it sounds like a cliche, but we do have to think about future generations. Um, I do think though we have to be a little bit careful about being too optimistic as well, because I think when you have 7.3 or 4 billion people, There's always going to be human conflict. It's part of a human frailty. Frailty, excuse me. I want to be optimistic about the situation, but you know, conflict is always seems to be an inevitable part of human nature, and that's why I find it hard to really relate to pacifism as an ideology because I just think it's a bit naive. It's a beautiful idea, but it's just a little bit naive. I'll save that for another video. I'm just encompassing different issues here. I'll talk at more length about that in another video. Anyway, I would say it's very, very important to, I've got little respect for this notion that you just whitewash the past or you just carpet over the past, or in some cases, people even want to destroy the past. In the 1960s in Britain, there was a lot of controversy because old buildings and old parts of our culture were just destroyed by, it was called architectural vandalism, basically. In my city, for example, old Binns trams, which were, Binns was a department store, and the trams were sort of an iconic image of my city. They were all burned in the 60s. Someone should have had the idea of putting them in a museum. But the 1960s, especially, was notorious for architectural vandalism in that sense. So I think that where there are projects to look at the past, they need to be supported. I don't think it's a case of clinging to the past. I think that's the wrong word, but just sort of giving us a connection and saying this is not that long ago. Not far from where I live, there is an open museum called Beamish. Now that kind of focuses on it's kind of like a farm and a school building, and it's kind of around the turn of the century, last century, I should say. Today or yesterday was the 4th of July, so our American friends have a lot of events to commemorate the period of the Revolutionary War, um, the War of Independence. And that's good. I think it's good to keep history alive in that sense. Here in the UK, we have organisations like the Sealed Knot Society, which has reenactments of battles of the English Civil War. Um, I don't think this is about glorifying warfare. I think it's about saying that history is not something that's musty in textbooks. It's part of our culture. I firmly believe that the history of a nation or even a city is deeply embedded and interlinked with the culture of that city. So when I go to a city, even if it's somewhere that I've been before, I almost always think about events that have happened throughout that city's history. This happened at that time. This happened at that time. I don't just go and think, oh, it's just a big city and that's it. For me, a city is almost like a breathing organism. It's much, much more than just buildings and people. People, of course, are a huge part of it. Anyway, I'm going to round this up. I have spoken for a while, but let me know your thoughts. We are in this exact time now. I could look back on this video and think, yeah, that's already history. So technology itself is becoming history. You know, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, we may look at Facebook and YouTube and Twitter in the same way that today we look at the silver screen or the Wright brothers in flight. So it is exciting to think about the future, but it's also a little bit. I think it's good to think about the future, especially in a positive context about human development. Um, but I also think it is important not to completely forget the past. So film, I think, is an extremely important medium in this. I think film more than anything else. I mean, living museums are great, but truth is, a lot more people go to see films than visit living museums. Although I'm a big fan of living museums, I think they're a very good idea. But film is extremely important. That's why historic films have a very, very important role, in my opinion. So we are in this point looking at the future, not forgetting the past. Let me know your thoughts.